In the next 50 minutes, you're going to take that old computer gathering dust in your closet and turn this into a powerful private home server running your own finance budgeting software. And the best part, you can access this from any of your mobile devices or computers. Now, running a home server in 2026 is actually easier than you think, even if you've never tried it before. I'm going to show you the Proxmox method. It's completely free, it's easy to install, and it is a solid foundation for your server. I trust it so much that my own home server runs on it. You know, the thing that your ISP provides that connects you to the internet. To do this, you don't need anything fancy. I'm using a cheap mini PC. You can find one of these on eBay for as little as $50, like this 5-year-old Lenovo ThinkCentre Tiny. But honestly, any old laptop or desktop from the last decade works just fine. As long as it has a couple of drives and connects to the internet, you're good to go. Now, why are we using this specific software stack? First, there's Proxmox. Think of Proxmox as the landlord. It owns the building, your hardware, and rents out apartments. We call them virtual machines, and it rents them out to different tenants. For our first tenant, we're going to choose Debian Linux. We use Debian because it's rock solid and it's used by pros everywhere. And then we have Docker. Docker is like the furniture in the apartment. This is where all your actual apps live. By the end of this video, we're going to install a powerful budgeting app called Actual Budget as our first test app. But stick around for section 3, where I'll show you a tool called Portainer. It makes managing all of these apps we're going to install almost as easy as using an iPhone. So let's go through the hardware that you would need for this setup. So the first thing you'll need is a screwdriver set that you can find at your local hardware store, or you can buy it online on Amazon, for example. The next thing we'll need is a computer. That will be the one that you'll use for your server. In this case, I'm using my wife's old Lenovo laptop. If it's a laptop with a working keyboard and display, you're good to go. If it's a PC, then you will need a monitor and keyboard. Once you have everything up and running, you can run it in headless mode, so you don't need a display or a keyboard later on. The next thing you'll need is a USB stick of at least 16 gigabytes. And this is where we will install Proxmox from. You will need 2 SSDs of at least 128 gigabytes. Depending on what your computer supports, you will either need to go with the external drives route or the internal drives route. For the internal route, you would use an NVMe drive or a SATA drive, which is slightly older, but it is still very relevant today. Make sure the computer you're going to use for your server supports at least 2 of these. Typically, it's easier to find 2 of these in a desktop PC. Even the older desktop PCs would support this. But this might be a bit trickier to find in a laptop, such as the one that I use in this example. It only has a single SATA drive. For the external route, you can buy portable USB enclosures like the one I've shown on the screen here. Make sure to get a 2-bay one, or if you're getting a single bay one, you need 2 of those. You don't need to buy new drives. You can buy used drives from eBay or any other similar retailer, and they don't even need to have 100% health. I wouldn't recommend using spinning hard drives for this. For installing software, you definitely want to use a solid-state drive. They're much better at handling smaller reads and writes. This is what typically an operating system or other kinds of software would need. Although you could go with just one single solid-state drive, that's what you would typically find in a computer, I wouldn't recommend this on a device that you plan to run 24/7. So we have 4 milestones to achieve today. I'm gonna go through them as an overview now. So the first milestone is to install Proxmox. That will be your hypervisor. Inside Proxmox, you would create a virtual machine and then install Debian on it. Debian is a Linux-based distro that is widely used, like I have mentioned before. And once we've installed Debian, we are ready to now install Docker, and Docker is going to act like our host for all our apps. And finally, we're going to deploy the finance budgeting software, Actual Budget, on top of Docker. So in the next section, we're going to get a USB drive ready for installing Proxmox from. For doing this, I prefer using Ventoy. Ventoy provides a really nice user-friendly interface where you can boot from multiple, for example, ISO images. And you can do this without having to reflash your USB drive over and over again whenever you need to install from a new ISO. You'll see exactly what I mean when I get to that section. The links for Ventoy are in the description below. In a future video, I'll be going through iVentoy, which is a way to do a network boot, also known as a PXE boot, where you can run a PXE server on your personal computer and you can boot from the ISOs that you have provided from there. And you need to make sure your UEFI or BIOS supports this feature. Let's go ahead and download Ventoy now. So we need to go to the official website for Ventoy. Just search for it. For Windows and Linux users, you just need to download the zip files or the tar.gz file over here. And while that downloads, I'm going to take my USB drive, plug that into my laptop, and then you need to extract the zip file. So I'm using 7-zip for this, but your default Mac or Windows extraction tool should work for these kind of things. So now all you need to do is run the main application for this, Ventoy to disk. And as you can see, I already have the latest version of Ventoy on this. In your case, it may show something different, or if it's a new drive, it may show nothing over here. So in my case, I'm not going to do anything. I'm not going to press install or update. You can do one or the other. And what you will end up with is, if you go into my PC, you are going to see Ventoy. Now you will also see another partition on this drive that may appear in some cases. This is the EFI partition. You do not need to mess around with this. This is purely for your BIOS to boot. So I'm going to go into Ventoy, and as you can see, I already have a bunch of ISOs in here. So the one that we are interested in is the Proxmox one. For Mac users, there is still a way to do this. Unfortunately, Ventoy is not supported on Mac. So what you can do instead is search for this tool called Balena Etcher. And as you can see, Balena Etcher is a tool in which you can flash a bootable disk onto a USB drive. So you just need to download Etcher. And in this case, as you can see, it is supported on multiple platforms, including Windows, Mac, and Linux. So in the case of Mac OS, you just need to download the appropriate version for this. So if you're on an M series Mac, you need the ARM64 version. If you're on Windows, you'll need the x64 version. If you're on an older Intel-based Mac, you will need the x64 version. So once you've downloaded Balena Etcher, it's got a really user-friendly interface. As you can see, if I go back to the previous screen, it is as simple as selecting an image, selecting a drive, and selecting flash. And you should end up with a USB drive that directly boots you to Proxmox. I would still recommend, if you can borrow a Windows laptop for some time from a friend, you can use that to create a bootable Ventoy USB drive. So the next thing you need to download is the Proxmox ISO. In my case, I've already downloaded it, but I'm going to show you where you can find it. So just search for Proxmox ISO. You go to the main website for Proxmox. You need to pick the one at the top, which is the latest version. You press download, and in fact, you get a ISO image to download. But in my case, I already have this. As you can see, I've already downloaded it right there. It's about a little under 2 gigabytes in size, so it might take a while for you to download depending on your internet speed. Now, what you need to do is switch over to your server. So in my case, I'm going to move over to my wife's laptop so we can start installing stuff on that. And now I have my wife's laptop set up here. And as you can see, it's a relatively old device. There's a key missing here. It's plucked off by her parrot, apparently. Long story. So I have everything plugged in here. So I have a keyboard, and I'm not going to use my mouse here. You don't need a mouse for this. So what you're going to do at this step is try to get into your BIOS or UEFI. I'm going to refer to this as BIOS from now on because UEFI is a bit of a mouthful. So I'm going to start by pressing the power button and mashing the function and F2 keys multiple times. As you can see, I have a password set up for my BIOS. So let me just quickly enter that. And we are finally inside the BIOS screen. Mine looks quite simple, but yours may look a little bit more complex than this. But don't worry, all you need to find is the boot order. So in this case, for me, it's the 4th tab here. And you can clearly see that the Kingston Data Traveler is the 3rd one. So all I need to do is move this up. So if you see the shortcuts on the right side, that's what you need to follow in this case. If your BIOS or UEFI supports a mouse, this might be a bit easier to do. So I'm gonna try and move this to the top. And once you're done with that, you just need to save and exit. So if you go to the tab here, and I press save changes or exit saving changes and just wait for it to boot. And this time, instead of going to Windows, which is what was installed on this, it's going to go and boot into Ventoy. So as I promised earlier, Ventoy is super user friendly. So in this case, it directly took me to the ISO selection screen. We are going to go to Proxmox and press enter, and we are going to do the normal boot. Congratulations! If you see the Proxmox logo on the screen, you've passed one of the most difficult hurdles in the setup. Many people might quit at this stage, but kudos to you, you've made it this far. And what we are going to do after this is only going to get exciting. So stick around for the rest of the video. So in this section, we are going to try and install Proxmox into the computer, which we are going to call our server after this step. So before I do that, I'm going to plug in my USB hard drives. For the purposes of this video, I'm going to use this Samsung 860 EVO and the Samsung 850 Pro. It doesn't really matter as long as they are matched up in size. In this case, I have 250 GB. Make sure you've left your Ventoy drive plugged in. So I'm going to select the graphical install because it's a lot easier to do it that way than the terminal. Give this probably 5 minutes or so. And you are officially now in the Proxmox installer. So you can go all the way down and press agree. You can leave most of these options default, but in this particular screen, I'm going to show you need to change your file systems, and I need to use a mirror configuration. That means 2 drives more or less mirror each other in and storing data. This creates redundancy, and this is what you want for a server that runs all the time. So in my case, because it's 2 drives, I'm going to choose ZFS RAID 1 or ZFS RAID 1. You can also use BTRFS, but ZFS is a little bit more mature as a file system. It has been proven to work very reliably in data centers and mission critical applications. So let's choose RAID 1, and you'll need to provide which 2 disks that you would like to use for this. So be careful which devices you use for this, because this will overwrite your data on these drives. You can give a ZFS mirror configuration up to 4 drives, but in this case we just need 2 drives. You don't need to modify any of these advanced options. I'm going to leave them as default, and I'm going to press OK. So select your country from here. My case is going to be United Kingdom. And my keyboard layout is probably going to be the same. I'm going to press next. Give it a password and an email. So as you can see, it tried to fetch an IP address, and clearly my computer over here is not connected with a wire to my router. But if you had that configured, you will see the real IP that was given to this device by the router. And as you can see, I have 2 devices in here. You do not want to use Wi-Fi for this. Definitely want to use the wired port on this, which is in my case the first one. So before you actually start the install process, Proxmox is going to show you a summary of what it is going to do. So far it hasn't done anything on the disk or modified anything on this computer. So it's only when you press install it's going to start actually doing that. So do verify your entire configuration over here. And in my case, I'm not going to press install because I already have Proxmox installed on my main server. So in this screen, make sure to take a screenshot or note down the IP address that you see here. So in this case, it's going to be the IP CIDR, and we'll get to the port later. I'll drop in a screenshot of how it would look after the installation is done. And after that, you don't need your keyboard, or in the case of a desktop, a display or a monitor connected to this anymore. So now that we have Proxmox installed on our server, we can put our server somewhere out of sight. Make sure you have connected it securely to your router. So what we're going to do now is head over to the IP address that we had noted down earlier. In my case, I'm going to be using my existing Mini PC, which has Proxmox installed on it. Make sure you enter the colon followed by the port 8006. This is the default port that Proxmox uses. And you need to use HTTPS. So in this screen, you need to log in with the username and password that you had created earlier. One other thing that I forgot to mention for you guys, because you're installing this fresh, you'll find a couple of hurdles along the way. So I'm going to open up a test instance of Proxmox that I have running. And I'm going to show you guys a couple of things that you might see that I don't have on my production server. So the first thing you'll see is that your browser may show that your connection is not private. And you may see something similar to this, but don't worry about this. You can safely ignore this for now. So all you need to do is click on advanced and proceed. The way your browser may allow you to access this may be slightly different. And once I log into this user, a pop-up that you'll see here as soon as you log in is this one. It says you do not have a valid subscription. This is because Proxmox has an enterprise version as well, which needs a valid subscription for which you need to pay. But for home users, it's completely free to use. It's non-commercial. So all you need to do for this is just press OK. Sometimes the pop-up doesn't close by itself. You can reload the page. In a future video, I'm going to show you how to remove all of this. You can completely turn off the nag screen and you can configure it in such a way that it uses non-enterprise repositories. This is something you do not need to worry about at this stage. So Proxmox acts like the main cockpit for your server. The most important reason why we use a hypervisor like Proxmox is that it sits one layer above your hardware, and another added convenience is that in case we need to shut down a virtual machine, we can always do so without actually being physically present near our server. And the best part about Proxmox for somebody who's just starting out with setting up home servers is that it is quite easy to use and it works pretty well out of the box. There's not a lot of initial setup that you need to do. In a future video, I will be showing you how to tweak a few things to make it a little bit nicer, but you don't need any of that at this point. So there are a few things you need to do before you can start creating virtual machines. I already have all of those things working on my instance of Proxmox, but I'm going to show you guys how to do it anyway. So let's head over to the node that you had given during the setup. So in my case, I've called it PVE, and then let's go into the shell. So this is the shell prompt, and this may look a little bit scary in the beginning if you've never used a shell prompt before. So essentially, this is where you can issue commands to your operating system and make it do things for you. Don't worry about this too much right now. We'll only be using this to set up a few things. And you can copy paste most of the commands that I'm going to show you in this video. And you can find the commands in the description below. So let's open up our node and we'll head over to the local disk. In your case, it might say local ZFS if you have used that. In my case, I'm using BTRFS. And once you've selected that, you need to head over to the ISO images tab. So let's download the Debian ISO image into this. So I'm going to open up a new tab, search for Debian. You can grab the URL for this by right-clicking this and pressing copy link address. So let's head over back to Proxmox and we are going to press download from URL. And you just need to paste what you just copied and press query URL, and it's gonna fetch the name of the file. You just need to press download over here. And while this downloads, let's go over a bit about what a virtual machine is. So think of a virtual machine as carving a slice of cake out of your computer's hardware. The current slice that we are allocating to is for Debian. In case you ever mess something up, you can always reset that slice and you have the whole cake back again. In our case, we're just going to use one VM. The operating system that's running inside a VM is called the guest OS, and Proxmox is the host OS. So once we're done with this, we can close this window and head back to the node. So I'm going to click Create VM over here. You don't need to change much here, but in my case, I'm giving this an ID. We can go to the next screen. You need to choose your ISO image. That is the Debian ISO that you've just downloaded. So in my case, it is local BTRFS. So let's choose Debian 13.3, which is the latest version of Debian that's available at the time of recording of this video. You don't need to change many settings in here. We're going to change the bus device to VirtIO block. You can leave most of the other settings as is. 32 gigabytes should be plenty, but depending on your use case, you might want to give it a little bit more. For example, 64 gigabytes or 128 gigabytes. And since we are going to be doing all of this on an SSD, let's turn on discard. We can leave all of the other settings as it is. For the CPU cores, we're going to give it a couple of CPU cores. If you have a more powerful CPU with more cores, you can allocate more cores to it. So for memory, again, this depends on the hardware that you have. 2048 should be plenty to begin with. So for the network configuration, again, there's not much to do here. I'm going to turn off the firewall. So let's click on next. As you can see, there's a summary of everything. Just make sure everything looks okay from here. And I'm going to press finish. So as you can see, Proxmox is now trying to create the VM and set some initial configurations up. You can actually click on the VM over here, and now you can see that it is ready to be used. Another thing that is so convenient about VMs is you can change its hardware configuration easily. In fact, if you get a more powerful server in the future, you can migrate this entire setup over to the new hardware without actually changing anything inside the VM. So I'm not going to be changing anything inside the hardware section at this point, but I'm going to be going inside options and enabling the start at boot. You definitely want to do this because every time Proxmox starts up, you also want the VMs to start up along with it. I am also going to enable the QEMU guest agent. So once we've done that, all we need to do is head over to the console. We don't have anything running in here, so we need to press start, and hopefully everything starts up just fine. Very quickly, if you're on an SSD, you will reach the install screen like this. So what we're going to do next is try and install Proxmox into the VM that we created. So I'm going to choose graphical install, and I'm going to be going through this setup with most of the defaults. So at this stage, you will be asked to create a password for the root user. So the root user is like the God user, and when you log in as root, you have pretty much God control over that computer. In this case, the root has complete control over the VM's operating system. In fact, a little bit earlier when we were inside Proxmox's console, you probably noticed that we were also logged in as root. So now we're going to set up a regular user that is not root, and this is typically what you want to use on a day-to-day basis. And this is going to be the username that you're going to log in with a lowercase s. Again, give it a super secret password. So again, we're going to use most of the defaults here. So at this stage, you need to choose yes and click continue. So we are going to now press continue here. You want to uncheck the desktop environment and GNOME. We do not intend to use this server with a monitor and keyboard like we would use a regular computer. You would be accessing this remotely through your web browser or through SSH. And that is why we need to enable the SSH server. So while this installs, let me explain quickly what is SSH and why we need SSH. So SSH is an industry standard way to connect to another computer shell. And why we need this is because Proxmox is meant to be used remotely. There are certain situations where you would need to access Proxmox itself or Debian in this case via SSH. So there are two components to running SSH. So you need a SSH server. So in this case, Proxmox itself runs an SSH server, so you can connect to Proxmox remotely. You can also run an SSH server inside Debian. On the other end of the SSH connection is the client. So that is, let's say, your personal computer. As I'm going to show you, I'm going to use the host Proxmox's shell to connect to the virtual machine's shell. So you can choose the default here as well. We're going to choose the first device in here. And in a few more minutes, you should be up and running with Debian. So now the installation is complete and it is going to ask you to reboot your computer. So in this case, if you press continue, it's going to reboot. So I'm going to press continue and let it boot and find out what it does. So in this case, it did not automatically change that, but this is quite simple to do. So all you need to do is either stop or shut down your VM. So I'm going to stop my VM. We're going to head over to the options tab, and this is where you can choose the boot order. And we are going to now move the VirtIO device that we have installed Debian into to the top. Just drag it all the way to the top and you just press OK. Once you're done with that, you can go back into your console and press start. It's going to automatically boot into Debian at this point. So in a similar way, how we could use the shell prompt of Proxmox, which is also a Debian-based Linux distribution, we can do pretty much all of those things we could do there inside here as well. So in my case, I'm actually going to log in as my user that I had created earlier rather than root. So my user is going to be Serge and my password is super secret. So there is a slight limitation to this web UI provided by Proxmox in that you cannot easily paste things inside this console here. For example, if I were to type something in here, let's say test, copy this, I can paste it in other places. I can paste it back here. I can paste it in the host shell. But if I go inside the virtual machine's shell, if I try to paste something in here, you can't do anything. I cannot right click here. I cannot press Ctrl V or Command V if you're on Mac. So to solve this problem, we are going to use the SSH method. So we are no longer going to use this console and we're going to try to connect to this shell from the host machine's shell. So for doing this, all you need to do is go to your root node here, click on the shell tab again if you're not already there, and type SSH followed by the IP address of the virtual machine. Now you may ask, how do I find that? So let's find out the IP address of this virtual machine. So for that, you're going to type IP followed by A and press enter. And in this case, it's going to show you a couple of options here. You want to look for something that has an IP address, and in this case, it says INET. You can't copy this address, so just memorize the numbers in here. And I'm going to go here and enter that there. So it's going to be SSH followed by my username. So I'm going to log in as Serge. In some cases, Debian may prevent you from logging in as a user. So it's going to ask for your password. So enter your super secret password in here. And as I had expected, Debian allowed me to log in as my user through SSH. One thing to keep in mind is Debian's shell is transient, which means if you switch to another part of the UI, it's going to throw you out back to the main screen here. So one way you can avoid this problem is to click on the shell button at the top here, and it's going to open up a new window like that. And this lets you move around in the UI over here, and you can quickly come back in here. So in this case, I'm going to log in back. And at this point, I want you to take a pause here. Give yourself a pat on the back because you've made it through some of the most complex parts of the setup. The rest of the setup is only going to get easier and easier. So once you're in the shell prompt of Debian, what we need to do next is try and get Docker running. Now the question that you may have is, what is Docker and why do I need to run things in Docker? I use the term Docker as a ubiquitous way to say containerized applications. Think of container apps as a shipping container. They contain everything that they need to run. So we don't need to worry about the classic problem where you say, runs on my computer, and the other person may say, no, it doesn't run on mine. Docker solved this problem by building some infrastructure that can run standard containerized apps. You can even build your own containerized apps. Also, another important difference is, unlike virtual machines, they don't need to run a complete operating system on top. In today's setup, we'll be installing Docker in root mode. In a future video, I'll be showing you guys how to run Docker in rootless mode. So to install Docker, it's actually quite simple. Docker itself has officially provided a shell script. The command is going to be found in the description below. And once I've pasted it in there, I just press enter. Make sure to type in the word sudo or sudo. And what sudo means is you are asking to be provided extra privileges to run this. You can run this for now, and it is going to ask for. So we actually need to install a program called sudo, and this allows you to run privileged commands. You need to first become root for the time being. So I'm going to type su followed by a hyphen. It's going to ask for your password here. And now you can see we've actually become root. So I'm going to be installing sudo, and it is done. So we can now exit from here. So all you need to do is type exit. Now get back to our user shell prompt. And over here, all you need to do is go back and install Docker. Enter your password. As you can see, I'm not adding the sudo list. su followed by dash. And once you're in root, you can add your user to the list of sudoers. And I'm going to exit back to my user's shell. And you may have to log out of Debian and come back in for it to reflect changes. So to exit, you just need to type exit and exit once more. And we are now back in the host. So we are going to try and I'm going to try and install Docker now. So we've hit another slight hurdle where we do not have curl installed. So we're going to now try and install curl, which is again quite simple. So now that we have curl installed, we should be able to run the official Docker install command. So as you can see, we've hit a few hurdles, but we've got through most of them. This may take a few minutes, probably more than a few minutes, depending on how fast your internet is. But in my case, as you can see, it has already installed Docker. So now you may ask, how do we know that Docker is in fact installed? To do that, we need to run this command. So that's Docker followed by 2 dashes and version. So as you can see, it says Docker version 29.2.1. And another thing we need to check is the Docker Compose version. We'll get to that a little bit later. So we need to install our first containerized app, which is called Portainer. And we need Portainer so that we can now switch over to another web UI where we can easily deploy new applications. Using the web UI is a little bit easier, especially when you're starting out with servers. For doing that, you will first need to create what's called as a named volume inside Docker. You can copy the script from the description or here on the screen. So that's going to be Docker volume create followed by the name of your volume. In this case, I'm going to call it Portainer_data. You need to run this command as sudo. So if you see the name of the volume in the next line, that means it has succeeded. It's not going to tell you anything apart from that. And the next command we are going to run is going to install Portainer. So what this command does is you are asking Docker to run a particular container. So in this case, we are running it in detached mode. That means you let it run in the background, which is what we want for server-side applications. We're going to give it a port. So by default, 9443 is fine. We're going to give this a name. So it's going to be called Portainer. You don't need to change that. And we are going to importantly leave the restart policy as always, which means that every time your computer starts, in this case, every time your virtual machine starts, Docker is going to try and run this. And we're going to give it some of these volumes. You don't need to worry about what this does for now. You're just giving Portainer control of the Docker socket itself. The other volume is obviously the named volume that we had created, which is Portainer data. And finally, we have the name of the image. And like I mentioned about containers, they are built out of pre-built images. And this is why they just work seamlessly anywhere where Docker can run. It does not rely on your specific hardware or your setup. We're going to press enter. Make sure to add the sudo in the beginning, otherwise it's going to deny you from doing anything that needs privileges. So as you can see, it is pulling down an image called Portainer-CE, and in this case it's going to pull it from the official Docker repository. So once we're done with this, we can be sure that Portainer is running, and the easiest way to check this is to open a new tab. And you need to type in the address that you had used earlier to log into Debian via SSH. So if I remember, and you need to enter the port here as well. So similar to Proxmox, this also has a port 9443, which we had entered in the Docker run command earlier. And you just press enter and you can see a similar SSL or certificate warning. You can completely ignore this and proceed even if it says it's unsafe. You need to create a password. So I'm going to keep my user as admin and I'm going to give it a super secret password again. So as Proxmox was the cockpit of controlling your server's hardware and deploying virtual machines where you can run operating systems on top, Portainer acts as a cockpit for deploying containerized apps. So over here, Currently, you do not have anything running, so you can press Get Started. So you need to simply click on the local environment, and it's going to take you to this page. Now, similar to Proxmox, there's not a lot of setup you need to do in Portainer and even in Docker to get a containerized app up and running. So if you click on the Stacks button right here, you're going to see an empty screen, and we are going to be deploying actual budget as a compose stack. Think of a compose stack as a recipe. You define a set of configurations, in this case, think of it like ingredients. And when you execute that, Docker knows how to bake that recipe, for example, if it's a cake, and give you that cake. And in your case, your cake is going to be actual budget. So before we can deploy actual budget, I want to talk quickly about volumes. Containerized apps by default are built so that they do not persist any data. So every time you turn off a containerized app or restart it, it's going to forget about all the persistent data. The only way you can make it remember data is to define volume mappings. And for Portainer, if you look back at the command, we used a named volume. We can continue to use named volumes, but I prefer using absolute paths. So named volumes are entirely managed and controlled by Docker, and that's why you don't need to worry about them. But sometimes it's a little bit better to have control of where the data is stored. And in this case, you might be even interested in browsing that data. Before we can deploy actual budget, we need to provision some additional resources. Follow along carefully because most of the container apps that we're going to deploy follow a similar formula. First, instead of using named volumes like we did for Portainer, we're going to map a folder path from your Debian VM into the container. These are officially called as bind mounts. So check out all the commands that I've left in the description below. Make sure you're connected to your Debian VM via SSH before you do anything. We are now going to create a path on the Debian VM that we can bind mount into the container. Let's navigate into the folder that we just created so we can use the cd command. Notice that the cd command does not need a sudo. I'm going to quickly jump over to the actual budget documentation, and I've left a link to this in the description as well. I'll give you a quick explanation of why we need HTTPS, and if you noticed, we needed to access both Portainer and Proxmox using HTTPS. And the reason why everyone these days are using HTTPS, you name it, it is a way to make sure that the communication between the client and the server, in this case it's going to be you and actual budget or you and Portainer, is going to be as secure as possible. For now, just understand that we need to use SSL certificates to achieve this, and actual budget actually requires us to use HTTPS. So if we scroll down this page, there is a command that's mentioned here that uses OpenSSL to generate some self-signed certificates. So what I'm going to do is copy this from here, head over back to my Proxmox console and paste it in there, and I'm going to hit enter again. Now at this step, you will need to open a new tab and look up what your country code is. So in my case, it's going to be GB, but this may be different for you. So make sure to look this up. The rest of the items can be left blank, and for that you need to use a dot. And if you don't see any errors here, that means your certificates have been created. Now in the next step, we need to let actual server know that these certificates are in this place. And for that, we need to create a config.json file. So for this, you can copy and paste this exact command in there. And we are going to enter a text editor. Think of this like Notepad or text edit if you're on a Mac. You simply need to copy and paste the contents of the config.json that I have put in the description below. So I'm going to simply click paste, and as you can see, it has some information here. You need to press Ctrl and X, and this would be the same if you're on a Mac as well. So you just need to press Y on your keyboard, press enter, and thankfully that's all you need to do in the terminal for now. We can head over to the really nice and user-friendly web UI of Portainer. So inside Portainer, we need to go to the stacks and add a stack, and we need to give this a name. I'm going to call this actual server. So I've copy pasted the standard Docker Compose configuration in here. And this is a standard image that is stored on the Docker Hub repository. For the ports, we are going to use the standard ports. And what this means is that we are mapping the port 5006 to the internal port 5006. This is called exposing a port. But just keep in mind that at this point, you need to do this so that you can access Docker from the outside world. We need to define our volume mounts. So we had created this volume, if you remember, and if you also remember, we created the SSL certificates and the config.json inside this. And we are mapping this to a folder called data. This is standard for actual budget. And after we're done with that, we're going to just scroll all the way down and click on deploy stack. Now at this stage, it's going to pull down the image for actual budget, which is what's needed to run this as a container. And it's going to set up all the configurations that you've given in the compose file. Once you're done with that, you will see a success message at the top. If you see an error message, you probably have done something wrong. So how do we access actual budget? It's actually quite easy. For this, we just need to copy the host IP address, including the protocol, in this case HTTPS, not HTTP. So we're going to go into a new tab, paste it in there, remove the / at the end, and use the port that we had defined inside Docker Compose. So it's going to be 5006. This is the same error that we had seen for both Portainer and Proxmox. I'm going to proceed. And at this point, I want you to pause for a minute again and give yourself a pat on the back. You have actually succeeded in deploying actual budget as a server, and we just need to create a password for this at this point. So there are a few things you can do here. You can try a demo if you want to, or you can press OK and create a new instance. So I'm going to create a new account in this. And now the account is created. It's always going to just ask you for the password. There is no username required. So it's going to ask me if I want to start afresh or view demo. In this case, I'm not going to start afresh. You can start afresh if you like, but I would also suggest trying out the demo. So you can click the view demo button, and it is going to populate an instance of a demo with some dummy information. And now you can go and play around with actual budget. It's quite a cool software. I've used it personally for well over a year. I've seen it grow and become a much more polished and robust software for handling my finances. I'll do a deep dive into actual budget and some configurations that I use. For example, rules. You can use this for personal budgeting. You can use this for your business. You can use this for planning a budget for your holiday. It's pretty powerful. Now that we've deployed actual budget, deploying other applications on this is going to be quite a breeze. We have most of the groundwork ready. So as a conclusion to this video, we managed to install Proxmox hypervisor on our computer. And after doing that, we have now made it officially a server. We've installed Debian Linux inside a virtual machine. Inside Debian, we've set up the Docker environment and Portainer so we can run containerized apps. And finally, we deployed Actual Budget, the app where we control the data and in this case, the finances that we've stored on it. A disclaimer at this point, I wouldn't recommend using this instance of Actual Budget to do any actual expenses. We need to make this more secure, robust, and also have a backup strategy in place. And spend some more time getting more comfortable with Docker and deploy a few more apps. There are two types of people in the world, those who back up their data and those who have not lost it yet. So what are our next steps after this? In future videos, we are going to be installing ad blocking using Pi-hole. We are going to be installing Jellyfin, which is Netflix, but for content that you own, for example, Blu-rays. We're also going to deploy a replacement for Google Photos and iCloud Photos called Image. And this one is probably applicable to everyone watching this video. We're going to deploy a really good replacement for Google Drive or iCloud Drive called OpenCloud. If you ran into any hiccups, drop a comment below and I will be sure to check it out and help you as much as possible. Also, do check out my Discord server and leave your comments in there. Be sure to attach some photos and videos so I can address your specific problems. And that's all for this video. I'll see you guys in the next one.